I'll start with Vidya since you shook my hand first. So, yeah, so your thoughts on the book in your context of how, see, a lot of people at MMA are entrepreneurs and doing their own stuff and so on and so forth. In that context, where do you see this book playing out? And there are students who are watching us from various parts. So if you can give your opinion on the book and the context, it'll be great.
So, opinion on the book.
Your thoughts.
Yeah, so thoughts on the book is, I think, one book that simplified things, because when things are simple, it's much more actionable. So before this, a lot of it was frameworks, it was a lot of steps. So I come from that part of the industry where day in, day out, I'm only working around this whole change and transformation. And before I even go into the book, I would say the relationship as human beings we have to change is itself a little skewed. Right? The moment I think of change, I can imagine this like a metaphor where you take a rectangle and we think like cutting the corners will make it into a triangle, but actually that's not what we have in mind as change. Change is absolutely different than what is existing. But that journey is something which is so like what we call the messy middle, where nobody is able to either hold themselves to complete the journey or to even understand where to start and close. So before this, it was all complicated, and the way the Heath brothers, what we call, have simplified it. It's no more organizational. It's no more about large systems. It's about saying even a small child, like how can you take a basic home system, any environment where human beings exist, and how can even a simple layman start to play around with change. So it turns it from a complicated, phenomena into something simple that I can expect. Right? Anybody can do it. You don't need to have, probably it's a lot of, hit and try, but the more you take it and then you start working around it, it's a metaphor to work with. And the way he simplified is brilliant. So I think it is not a book only for organizations and leaders. This is something that, anybody can pick up and say, how can I build my relationship with change? Because that's the most important skill we'll all need. And especially, I think, work with youngsters to say change is not to be waited for. It's something that I can... there's this very beautiful myth, right? We think change is complicated, especially at young people's scale, where they think, I'm part of a system, part of, victim of a system. But the way when the book starts, it talks about how somebody who has no power, no decision-making, can create huge influence in the social system. So I think that is a big shift, and which is why this is a book which can create action, not just the knowledge part.
Thank you, Vidya. Thank you so much. Sujita, same question, a different opinion. Yeah.
So, as far... Can you hear me? Yeah. So, as I read the book, what I realized, and I always have felt in my life, is that emotions play a very important role to anything that you are doing in life. Be it change, be it not change, whatever, but your emotions are the biggest. It's the elephant. So you have to deal with your emotions when you want something to be done. And how this can be controlled or how this can be channelized using your analytical mind, and how you create, you have a goal or you want to reach somewhere, or you want to change something which you think is wrong. And how do you do this? By taking charge of your emotions, which is the energy that is going to make the change, is very important, is what I realized.
This segment I'm going to ask your own stories on change, right? So it's, change is good. The book provides frameworks on change, and in fact the book talks about fantastic models of how they have adopted change and how people have things. I loved most of it in that sense. But I'm going to ask you, Vidya, to start with. What are those 2 or 3 points out of the book that resonated with you? And what is the backstory to that? Do you have a story, kind of your own experience? And while reading the book, did it strike you that, I've gone through a similar journey, or I've kind of come through this? Were there any moments when you were kind of going through this book?
Actually, a lot of them. So I read this book long back, and then when now you gave it, it's the new version, and it was interesting to go back and see. When I read it last time, it was different. And I read it this time, it was different parts that resonated. So right from the personal space to actually working with people, a lot of pieces were something, which was like literally talking, reflecting back. It's like a movie, but now you can make pieces, resonate with the pages in the book. One particularly would be about, there's this place where talks about a child, and this is just what we do in a lot of organizations, even in social settings. A child who's absolutely, in the discarded state where nobody wants to have him even in the classroom. And nobody knows how to work, no therapies are working, and there's no way to really get that child back into a space. But one person, just one person is able to catch that child for 1 hour window. But over a period of 1 month, there is a huge shift in not just the child, in the way the system is working with the child. And this is something personally I have seen. So it's something that we do, but if you look at the book, right, it very simplifies it in a way that any family can do it. We had like one of our participants in a program, one of the leaders, stepped out of the program. He said, okay, all of this is great. My company is moving everything, but I have a challenge at home. I'm brilliant here, but when I go back home, I'm absolutely drained because I don't know what to do with this child. The child was in 10th grade, refused to go back to school, turned violent and all of it. So though what we look at organizations in large scale, we have to make sure, something which can be simplified and works even at a children's level, that works. Right? So we have to take it like a challenge and say, okay, let me explore working with. Within 3-4 months, not just the child actually topped the scores, ended up in the next 2 years as someone who started taking camps for other children. And this is very close to my own personal journey as well. So what really turned around, by 11th and 12th, this child was actually doing entrepreneurial things, looking at saying, how do I invest my time? But what really shifted is, there's a point where you mentioned saying, point to the destination. Instead of trying to look at change as correction, fixing, something's wrong and I need to change it, I need to ask, what is something different possible here? Right? We keep saying there is a problem, right? The child is getting all of these issues in the school. What else is possible if this does not exist? So there's this beautiful, question here in the book which says, ask for miracle questions, right? What if all of this didn't exist? What would you like to see? And that was actually a question which I asked that child. I said, okay, all of this, what is happening, every single day is messy. If this didn't exist, and you actually woke up saying, wow, what a day, right? What would have shifted? And the child gave me a set of things which didn't match with what the world was right now. All we did was to say, what can you do today? Just one small thing today to go near that. Today to go near that. Just one small thing. Simplify it and make it very simple for the child. As simple as today, instead of, feeling like I need to hit or I need to shout, can I just go and drink water? Just one small thing practiced over, repetition over 7 days, 5 days, 3 days. And I'd walk with the child. With 3-4 months, if you see, she'd come back and say, wow, this was brilliant. Nobody was fighting with me. Nobody's scolding me now. Suddenly my teachers are appreciating. Now her reality is shifting because her movement is shifting. So I think that's something beautiful. And if this can be done at a children's level, I've seen that again implemented in organizations, because organizations are nothing but living organisms, and every person, I keep saying, leaders and parents, not much different. Just that we have to look at it saying there are people with different behaviors, and what can I do with respect to understanding what's behind their action, the elephant that we spoke about, the path that I need to draw, right, as a team, as an environment that I create. Inside of that, people will start moving their behaviors. So these are one. Another one I'm saying at a personal space is, I came from a space where I was acute asthmatic, right? And today we do Himalayas across in different altitudes. Again, what shifted was point the direction. From someone who always saw, if I take 4 steps, I'd end up having a wheezing, I'd end up on the bed, to saying, is it possible for me to actually scale mountains, to probably get into games, to probably go into endurance, right? And then rework back on saying, what's one thing I can do to shift the game? So the whole change model they've given is very simple, very beautiful. Only difference I would say is what is not mentioned in the book is, it talks about the entire concept, the space where it begins for human behavior to change begins with us being able to see that visual clearly. What do I really mean by change? Because change again is moving, but what exactly can I see that I want? Whether it is a leader or an individual or a team, if I can see that more clearly, then, to take this book and work around it will be like exactly the architect, right? Like you visualize it in the mind, but then you now say, what is it, which step do I build the bedroom first, what measurements and all of that. So that is very much available in the book. The order will be to begin with point the direction, become clear on the visual, and then start working around change.
Wow, good show. Superb. Yes, Sujita, something in this book that you resonated with personally from your experience or stories in the book that you found inspiring, could be something that...
I think one thing which I really found interesting and also I've experienced is that when you give too many choices, people get confused. They really, actually you give them a couple of choices, they're able to choose better than when you give them 10 or 20 different choices. So this I've seen in our school which we run in Kanyakumari, where we wanted the children and the teachers to start talking in English. It's a remote village in Kanyakumari. So initially we told them read books, read newspaper, watch news, many options. But ultimately nothing would work out. A few of them would try and give up after some time because there were too many choices, and maybe they'll try reading, sometimes they will try looking at the English news, sometimes they'll go back to the library, so it's very confusing. Maybe it doesn't work for them immediately and they don't really know what to continue with. So the choices are too much. Then we came up with this idea where we thought that all they have to do is speak in one sentence in English per day. Like for example, when they are called, the attendance is called, instead of saying yes ma'am or whatever, they are supposed to say, I'm here ma'am. Like a sentence, proper sentence. So this is what they have to repeat for maybe a week. And when somebody makes a mistake, and also we thought an area in the school where they should speak only English. The rest of it, we were also wanting them to speak in Tamil. It's not that they should not, but we wanted their language skills to improve. So maybe the corridor is the area where you are supposed to speak only in English, but it will be all wrong. So there are these instances where the teachers and the students may say something very funny, but that funny thing is picked up and they are actually appreciated for trying. So each time somebody made a mistake, there will be a bottle in front of the class and they would put a tamarind seed inside. So ultimately, though the tamarind seeds were higher in some classes, it did not make any difference to them because actually they were enjoying the process. So the process was very important, and ultimately at the end of a few months there was a big change. That is what we were looking at, more than how they were doing it, each of them were doing it. So the choices that we gave people is very important. Make it very specific and make sure that they are able to follow the choice.
Wow, super. I wanted to kind of, being a chartered accountant, any change in the corporate context, especially in the pricing environment or in the budget environment, I always took refuge in a spreadsheet. I would prepare a spreadsheet and show the difference to my team or to my clients and so on and so forth. And 50-50, I'd succeed 50% of the time, 50% of the time, I found that it didn't kind of make an impact at all. But the book, they had a beautiful story in which there is a factory manager who is analyzing cost cutting for the factory. And he discovers that the factory is buying, the company has multiple factories spread over the country, and they are buying 400 plus different varieties of gloves from different manufacturers, different suppliers, different things. And he discovers one thing, that a similar gloves costs $3, also some other factories buying it for $25 or $15 or something like that. So he says, how do I bring this information to everybody's mind? So instead of putting it as a spreadsheet, he brings a supply of all these gloves into the boardroom and he keeps it on the boardroom table. 400 different pairs of gloves are placed in the boardroom for people of all the factory managers. Different factory managers come to make their pitches. They are all, when they walk in, they see this entire table filled with gloves. And the same looking gloves are priced differently. Right? One is $2, one is $15, one is $8. And then they realize that, hey, we're spending so much more. Maybe somebody is ordering immediately, somebody is placing an annual order, there are price differences, price advantages. So it brings home that aspect that sometimes change, to bring about change, you need to visualize things. People need to see it visually rather than your, wordings or your numbers. And people kind of view it differently, but that really kind of brought me to the point that, maybe everything need not be said in one single way. You have multiple ways, and a visual way could be a very powerful way of bringing change to happen. So I think that was to me a very powerful story, as was this aspect which, we're always trying to find an excuse of why change is not possible. Right? I have classically believed that model. Many times when I didn't want to change, I always found an excuse. In the book, it talks about this gentleman who is, given charge of Vietnam in the good old days where he is supposed to, Vietnam after the Vietnam War had very limited resources, and it was, there was a lot of malnutrition that was happening to children. And this gentleman had a very limited resource, limited budget to cover the entire country and to solve the malnutrition problem, right? So he could have just stood up and said, hey, budget is not enough. I don't think I can make any change with this budget. But he decides otherwise, and he says, instead of trying to solve this big problem, let's look at how people are dealing with this. And in one very poor locality where everybody is sick and malnutrition, he finds that one household alone, the child is really, really healthy. Right? They're all living, they're all eating the same food, they're probably in the same locality, playing the same locality, but one kid seems in good order. And it's not like the parents are very rich and affordable as compared to the rest of the parents. So he further investigates into it and finds out that the mother feeding the child adds a small element which the other parents don't add. The other parents give the children the same food, but this parent adds a small seaweed or something like that to that shrimp to the sweet potato bean. So because of which the child is exposed to additional nutrients and because of which it has a better physique. And these two items, anyway the family is consuming, the adults in the family are anyway consuming. So a small portion to the child doesn't cost the family anything. So armed with this idea, he comes and implements this across Vietnam. And lo and behold, in 5 years' time, the malnutrition rate has dropped tremendously. Right? So when a large solution you want to provide, it's not necessary you have to look at a complex solution with big budgets. All you need is a careful observation where the problem has already been started addressing and see whether you can replicate the problem in a larger group. And that I thought was very inspiring to me. And yeah, please.
So, Babu, taking from your example, right, and all the examples in the book, when you go to one point that really, if you see as a pattern, is the change happened because someone was taking the pain to do the homework, to do the groundwork. Because today, why I'm sharing this is today when we approach change, one of the first things is we try and read up about it. We try and find saying what's happening outside that I will plug and play here. And that is actually where, contrary to the book, right, most of it, if you see, there is a person who's committed to change first, instead of, so there's a very beautiful word he uses, TBU. True but useless. And that is the biggest one right now in every setting, every organization, especially in parenting, there is so much of information. And the Vietnam one, he talks about saying he was given all kinds of things on how there is, hygiene issue, water, basic necessities not there. All of it true, but useless for change. In terms of it requires very small things, seed level things where somebody has to get down to actual ground, observe real reality with what is really happening with people, which is how we were all. And why this is very critical is in today's AI era, we're becoming more and more information through. And we keep saying in our industry, knowing is not equal to doing. We're becoming more tilted towards knowing. Everybody knows a lot. And we know the more we know, the less we do. So this is where I think the book hasn't really kind of, highlighted it, but that's a, chord which runs across. And this is a part of, again, as an industry practice, we know when real change happens, somebody decides to do the real groundwork, right? Cleaning, observing real people, real situations. So what came out in the Vietnam one was he actually walked into every village. He studied, he took mothers with him and he said, can you go and find any child who's different than your child, who's lean and malnourished and actually is good but similar family. So he used the community with him, right? Taking the team. So when leaders, especially this I would like to say is with founders, in larger ecosystems, right? When one senior leader thinks of change, he kind of mobilizes people around him. But in a founder ecosystem, it is very difficult because you're trying to solve it alone. The first thing when we try and build, even in a family, right? When you want to bring about change, find one more alliance, right? And then work with them to find, instead of saying, what should I fix? Find what is something I can anchor on. Something that is, giving me a little bit more closeness to that vision, right? And then do the homework, multiply it. What he did was multiplication, find innovative ways. The other content and things around the world are there to support your further work, right? Not trying to just say, okay, it worked here, so let's just multiply and copy paste here, because same organization, same industry, what worked for another firm doesn't work for this because the DNAs are different, the elephants are different. Riders who look same, right? So that's something which is worth.
Absolutely. I brilliantly added EBU, true but useless. And like Vidya said, today there is no dearth of information. That information is 6 inches in the palm of our hands, right? Everything is available. But is that going to bring about change? There is, in fact, more information than we actually need in whatever form. But is that going to bring about change? Unfortunately, no. You must know what information you need to harness and how you are going to use that information and implement it in your context. And what is the motivation you're going to have to implement it? Like Vidya said, the elephant, how are you going to kind of motivate the elephant to move with you? Your perspective on that.
Yeah, continuing on the Vietnam story, though they found they found healthy children. So how do you tell the other mothers to follow it? You cannot tell illiterate villagers that this is the way it works. It will not reach them. They might not even believe you or try it. So what they did is they formed small groups and had cooking classes where they would just not tell them that this is the way to do it. They would just teach them how to cook the right way, and then they went home and tried it. So the way you actually convey the message or the path you show them is very important for people to follow. Another example which I really liked in the book was when a health center, the CEO wanted to see more, he didn't want so many deaths. So he made it a very a straightforward statement that we should save 1 lakh patients within this month, June 30th or something. So they were given a specific task, specific number, which might have looked very big for the people, but somehow he also gave them few pointers of these are the few things, just few things that you could do so that the patients can be, so many deaths are not possible because of maybe because people are not watching what is happening. So one of the examples, one of the things that he insisted was that they should be at an incline, the patients, so that the secretions do not go into their into the lungs. So these are small things, but then they could reach the number that he said within that stipulated time. And they also made sure that this news went around to different hospitals, and they made people agree to signing up for this. So when you show an example, which is possible, and then you are building a community around it, and then people buy in, and also you kind of appreciate people who have done it. So make sure that people are appreciated for achieving what they did. So these are small things that could make a project or something, some change that you want successful.
Absolutely, absolutely. Not only should you have a very specific goal. The book talks about 100,000 lives saved by 16th June. So exact date, 18 months to the date. And by getting initial allies of a couple of hospitals, then you go back and tell the other hospitals, hey, these guys have signed up to save lives. Is your hospital going to sign up or not? Really puts pressure on the hospital that's not yet signed up, saying that, hey, I'm in the business of saving lives, so I better sign too. So you kind of getting one by one people to sign up for this whole thing. So I think it's really that specificity of the goal, the change that you want to make. And he talks about it in a reasonably good measure, saying that if you want to lose weight, let's say as an example, it's not important to say, I want to lose weight. It's important to say, I want to lose so many kgs by so and so date, and then your path to that becomes much more easier. You say, how are you going to do that? What is your motivation? How are you going to motivate the elephant in you to follow that path? So each of these get explained reasonably well, and I think it's a fantastic book from that point of view. If one of us wants to implement a structured change in whatever we are attempting to do, I think this is a fantastic book. With that, I'm going to come final round of questions. Yeah.
So just wanted to add a neuroscience perspective to it. Generally when we look at reading a book, right, we look at it more like a logic, something I understand and all of it. But what actually is happening with change, I just want all of you to visualize it at this moment, right? Now imagine you're driving a car, there is the gears that we change. If you are in a car and you keep changing the gear, does it move? If you are in a car and you change the gears, does it move? It doesn't move because it still needs the energy on the back end. It's a similar way that the gears that you are talking about is the ways you can do things and all of that. Can I go right? Can I go left? Can I do first gear, second gear? All of to apply between first gear and third gear, there are so many thinkings. That is the rider. But actually the real movement will come only when the engine is run. And that engine runs whether you're on first gear or on the third or fifth gear. And that's exactly what we say when we look from the behavioral science and neuroscience. Constantly the engine is the emotion. There is a limbic system which is constantly interacting between, actually we say there are 3 switches. There is the switch which goes into when I am doing, I'm thinking about myself. What am I doing here? Why am will I be able to, everything to do with I is the one switch. The moment I am there and there is the emotion playing, and I also have saying, now what do I do about? What should I do? What action should I do outside? Between these two, there is another switch which is influenced through directly the emotion. Now, so any time that I wake up in the day, if I'm only in the thinking loop, right? The first thing for change I need is to, see what is the emotion and see if I can shift that emotion. Because to move to the action loop, this is in between. We keep thinking about change and don't take an action. The simplest thing is get up from your seat instead of the big change, right? Change starts from moving that switch. So if you want the room bright, first is to turn the switch. So I just want to add that metaphor. When you think of change, think of the switch also. Between thinking loop and action loop, and it will always have the emotion. So instead of just saying, I will think about change, first feel it. What exactly do we really want? Right? And then begins, and because when you feel it, the identity of who's trying to change will shift. A classic example of mine would be when I thought about climbing the mountains before, I was a victim, I was someone who was helpless. But the moment I started visualizing saying, can I enjoy on the mountains? Can I be the most cheerful one on the mountains? I'm someone who's resilient. Now my actions change. My body struggles, but I go a little bit more, just 1 minute more, another 1 minute more. And my body learns endurance rather than the suffering and the learned helplessness. So every time that you're going to read that book, I also want you to remember that when you read a page, don't just keep going. Take one action around it. That's when the book will become really valuable for you. Or anytime you approach change, if you have an idea, experiment one small thing, you'll lose nothing, at least you'll go one step better. So
just hold on to that mic, Vidya. I want to get your final comments. We have a few minutes before we ask the questions. Your final thoughts on the book, and more importantly, I just wanted to get your perspective because you are also a coach and so on. The author talks about imbibing growth mindset, and a lot of times change, especially from an organizational context, is that the organization wants to change, but the people continue to kind of resist that change. How do you imbibe a growth mindset in people? And your thoughts?
Beautiful question. We see this day in, day out, so happy to take that. So when an organization thinks of change, if we can break it down, we're talking about somebody at the top talking about change. But what we're talking about change is at people at different layers and different parts of the organization. What I mean by change at the top and trying to drive it down means different for different people. The first part before I actually go about saying let's do change is to understand what does it mean for each layer and each person, because even in the book they mentioned that and we say that their context is different. My context of change, the same thing. For example, I put a bottle here. For somebody, if I'm a painter, I look at it saying what can I paint. But if I'm a child, I'd say what can I play with. Another person will say I'm thirsty. So the same change driven from top would mean different to different people, and it will be, when we say resistance, is basically they are not clear on what is the outcome of change that we are driving. So before, this is where most of the change processes fail, is we immediately jump on to say let's change this is the problem, that's there, this is the thing that we can improve. Even improvisation is built over something that's not working. But rather to ask, what do I really mean by change? Let's say I want to have, classic one we just did. Let's say I want to have 10x of the revenue. That is change, yes, but what does it mean for the guy who's actually going and doing sales? His strategy might change. He might be used to dealing with a certain set of sales clients, right? But now he'll be going to somebody else. Is he ready for it? Does he feel competent for it? Is he trained for it? Just pushing him to say, now change this and go and do 10 more, do this kind of a different industry, that won't make a difference, right? Because he's not clear what he was doing before and what he's doing now. Where is the shift? So first of all, when we talk of change, and especially in a human system, it needs to become personalized. You actually need someone who looks at it, who takes the pain to drill it down to micro detail. Because when change happens, it's beautiful, but it happens only when people are clear. And then second, they are convinced I can do it. Third, we build the competency to do, saying I can improve on this. And then we build the consistency to say it matters, not just today, I will continue to do this change. Because many times organizations, we see suddenly we bring something and that is like 1 week, wow, that's the priority. Suddenly 4 weeks we don't talk about it. That means my brain says, oh, this is not priority. So this is the order it takes. So it begins with clarity. Especially I will say any entrepreneurs and founders, every time, because they're consistently thinking of change, think about what that change means to others. And I think people are very open. If you have an honest conversation and say, I'm thinking of this, what did it mean for you? They would come up with their concerns, challenges, sometimes even aspirations. And that would be a great start.
So what I hear you say is, it's not important to think about change, it's to communicate clearly and, communicate in a two-way fashion with all the stakeholders who are going to be in that journey for change. That's what I hear you. Superb, superb. Yes, your final thoughts on the book.
My final thoughts will be most of the time we know the destination or what our goal is. For example, I will take the example of the Himalayan trek because that is a good example for anything in life, I think. So when we sign up for a Himalayan trek, usually we go through the days and what we do each day, the number of kilometers and where we reach and all that. But when we start walking, it's a very different story because at the end of every day, we are going to be really exhausted. So what I found is that as we walk, we need to break down our journey into many different parts of the trek, and I think the trek guides do a great job by making it simple. Like every time they see somebody is very exhausted or almost giving up, they would just say, see, after 2 kilometers you see the tree there, and when you cross that you will see the bamboo forest. Because in the Himalayas you're not expecting a bamboo forest, but they will bring up something bright, some bright spot. Maybe there is a lake there or there is a view of the peak from there. So they make sure that they break down the journey and make it very interesting so that you don't really feel the humongous task of finishing and reaching the destination. I'd like to take the example of the trek that I did to Sandakpur. So on the way itself, the jeep stops and they tell you that, see, you can see the sleeping Buddha there. So when you see that, it's so amazing in the evenings when the sun is setting that you really want to reach there. But it's going to be a long process of 6 or 7 days of walking. But each day we are told about the different things that you will be seeing, passing through, so that we actually do not only focus on the sleeping Buddha, but also on the other things that we see as we go along the way. So similarly, in anything that we want as a person or as an organization, how much we can break down the process into interesting, smaller goals and make sure that people understand that they are reaching closer to the final destination will make the journey very simple, and also they will start enjoying the process.
Absolutely. Well said. I think the important message that I take away is that make those small changes, small adaptations before you hit that big change. Any big change comes out of making those small changes. And I used to have a friend who used to talk about, can you be a 1% better than what you are yesterday, and in 360 days you will be a different person wholly. If you can just do 1%, and 1% is reasonably easy for all of us to do. If you can consistently do 1% change, 1% better than what you did yesterday, in 360 days you will be a completely transformed human being. So, a fantastic point. Change is not the big bang. It's something that you have to do consistently and celebrate those small journeys and small wins along the way. And I think the book talks about it equally. I think there is some questions